There are two main ways, the way I look at it, to create story maps. First, publish an ArcGIS online map to a web application. Right? These are the web applications here. Visualize with me, and we'll show it in a moment. The gallery of, 6 times 3, about 18 little thumbnail maps. Swipe maps. Charlie wrote a blog about that recently. And there's a bunch of other ones in there. There's a profile where you can make a 3D elevation profile. There's a bunch of them in there. We don't give you too many because it's designed to be, sort of the most popular, the most useful. There's other ones that are not in that particular gallery that we can talk about sometime. But what you're doing there is you're creating an ArcGIS online map, and you're just publishing it to one of the Storymaps web applications. I'll demonstrate that in a bit. I also, though, want to mention, and I'll demonstrate this toward the very end of our webinar here in about 3 hours' time. Ha, 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 just kidding, just kidding. No, in about 10 minutes. Downloading and customizing Storymaps templates for your own use. You upload them and related files to your own server. So that is another way of creating story maps. It's a bit more complicated, but not too complicated, but it's more powerful, as you might expect. Number one, easier to do, less power. Number two, a little bit more complicated, but a little bit more power. Now, for both methods, I think it's important to note that story maps are based on ArcGIS online maps. So that means that you build your map inside ArcGIS Online first. And whether you're using method 1 or method 2, it doesn't matter. It's still based on ArcGIS Online maps. Now, the good news about that is that you're going to have two things when you're done. You're going to have a story map web application, and you're going to have an ArcGIS Online map. You don't have to change your ArcGIS, well, you don't have to change both of them. You don't have to change your story map unless you want to add photos and stuff, but you don't have to change the basic thing. If you go back and change your ArcGIS Online map, your story map will automatically update. Ooh, okay. More about that in a minute. Now, 3 points before we get rolling with the hands-on. Well, this is all hands-on, right? But the demo. First of all, story maps are available for use are rapidly expanding. Yeah, there's some story maps out there that may not be suitable for education. It's rare that I come across one. Really, you folks, being the creative educators that you are, I'm sure can find lots of uses for these various story maps. Local to global scale, present-day events. There was one that came out yesterday on the Philippines typhoon with photos and the path and the towns and so on, and historical events, core content, lots of things. Second, the tools to create these, as you might expect, are rapidly evolving. So please do not get too wound up into step 1, I do this. Step 2, I do this. Now, yes, you need to get a hold of the basic idea, but don't get too locked into, oh, shoot, where's that tab now? Right? We all have to sort of practice what Charlie's always advocating, and that is keeping your knees bent on this. Not this more than ever, more than anything, really. These story maps platforms are rapidly evolving. And the good news is that they're becoming more varied and easier to use. But they are rapidly changing. When I started making videos on story maps about last January, 3 months later I realized I need to update some of these because some of the tools are now much easier to use. And so that's the kind of environment we're in. Good planning, though, makes for good story map. We could have a whole webinar on planning a story and then figuring out, right? It's just like any good, compelling thing that you're creating, right? You don't just dive right in. It's field work, for that matter, right? You don't just wander out in the field and collect data, right? You have a plan. Same thing here with creating any map and a good story map. So let's do method 1 first, and then in the last few minutes of the webinar, we'll talk about method 2. But method 1, story maps as web applications. So we're going to upload and organize your multimedia, photos and videos. So in my particular case, I have some photographs out on Picasa Web, okay, or Google Plus now, right? So here's my gallery of some of the things that I've got publicly shared anyway up on Picasa Web / Google Plus. And in there, I created a folder. And my folder is called West Rail Line Denver. And here's me on the West Rail Line. It's a big deal. We've got a new light rail that runs out on the west side of Denver, Colorado. Very cool. So I took some photographs on my very first trip on the West Rail Line and wanted to make a story map about the West Rail Line. The point, though, is not really about West Rail Line. The point is that I've got them all in a folder, and I've got that folder publicly shared. And that folder, each photograph, right, is not embedded in some other place. Right? It actually can be able to pull it up. If I open this image in a new tab, this is just like creating map notes, right, in ArcGIS Online. We've all been there. You've got to have the ability, like I'm doing here, to pull up that photograph as a standalone web page. If it's embedded in a Facebook frame or an animation of some sort, it's not going to work. And so that's an important note. They're in a folder, they're publicly accessible, and they're all standalone images. Got it? All right, so now that you know that I've got this gallery of stuff inside Google Plus Picasa Web, now I'm going to go out to my content. Okay, so now I'm inside an organization inside ArcGIS Online. And I started, as I indicated earlier, with a web map. I'm going to open the West Rail Line web map. Now, the interesting thing, I think, is that in this case, I have a map with some trails on it. See these? In this case, the trails include light rail. Let me show you where I got this. I created a map for the NCGE conference this summer. And it is a map about the geography of Colorado. Imagine that. One of my favorite places. And in this, I actually created a Phase 2 kind of story map, which is right here. And we'll talk more about this in a minute. So this is another story map, but this is a Step 2 kind of story map. In other words, this is a story map that takes a little more time to create, but it's a little more powerful. But one of the things I wanted to draw your attention to is that I've got trails that I've actually digitized. I digitized them in ArcGIS Desktop, and I uploaded those to the ArcGIS Online environment. And one of the things I've got on here is a series of trails. And since I knew that I had already digitized the light rail line running from Denver out west to Lakewood, I started with that inside my ArcGIS Online map, right? So that's where this line came from. I didn't have to start over. And that's kind of cool that you can actually start with things that you've created in the past. So you can see I've got other trails on here right now too. But what we're really interested in is creating a story map from it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this as something, okay? And I'm going to keep it as West Rail Line base map, and I'm going to call it for webinar. And I can delete this later, right? This is just my tag that I've actually created for this demonstration for this webinar. Oh, there it is. Great. Now, I'm going to share it, okay? I'm going to share it with everyone. What I'm going to do with this is I'm going to make a web application, right? And you've seen this before. Make a web application at the bottom. And this is where I was talking about where you've got an elevations profile, you've got the swipe tool, you've got a variety of things. But number 2 here, on this number 2 page, and again, this, keep your knees bent. It might float around to a different page. But right now, the map tour is what I want. I want to publish that story map to a map tour. And I'm going to call it West Rail Line story map and then webinar. Okay? Very nice. Save and publish. Super. All right. So no bells and whistles come on, right? When you publish one of these web applications, where does it end up going? Well, it ends up going into your content, right? So if I'm going to go over to home on the left side and go to my content. And now I should have, see, I've got 2 things. I've got a web map, which I've shared with everyone, and I've got a webinar story map. It's a web mapping application, and I'm going to go ahead and share that with everyone. Okay, super. So now that's shared with everyone too. Now, the fun part starts.